But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. Welcome back to this conversation on unwrapping courage, a gift for your soul this season, 25 days of soul work. I am excited that you are back. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And for those who are new to this conversation, my name is Jaleesa Dallas. I am an author, coach, and consultant, and I help individuals and organizations cultivate courage. And what that looks like is helping them break barriers to their success, bolstering their belief for greater confidence, and building courageous behaviors to optimize their lives, ultimately so that they can experience belonging internally and externally in community. Thank you so much for joining me for this series. And if you want to follow along with us on this journey, then I encourage you to get our complimentary resource at www.gobravellc.com. Again, that's www.gobravellc.com. So thank you so much for being here. And if you could do me a favor and like, comment, subscribe, and share this with someone you know, I would be truly, truly grateful. So without further ado, you might have been wondering, what was that scripture? Well, that scripture came out of Isaiah 53:5. And we're going to be talking about healing soul wounds with soul work. And the reason why that scripture in particular is important is because it highlights essentially the theme of our conversation today, and that healing is a part of our inheritance. It is so much a part of how we can get from A to Z. It is in our blood and something that we all should be grateful for. Another reason why this conversation is important is because our readiness for the more, the better, the best, and all that God has for us requires for us to release. We have to release those things that are keeping us bound, that are keeping us stuck and stagnant. And then another reason why this conversation about healing soul wounds with soul work is important, because our life depends on it. We have to fulfill our purpose. I know I have said this multiple times. You will hear me say several things multiple times, but repetition is where it's at. And if I want you to get all these things rooted into who you are so that you can be better at what you do and that you can have everything your heart desires and be able to give from abundance, then this is necessary. So before we jump into this conversation, I want to define some terms. You know, that's one of my favorite things to do in coming together with you all. So soul wounds are negative abruptions to the mind, will, and emotions. Similar to flesh wounds, when not handled with care, soul wounds leave scars. These scars show up as anxiety, depression, and trauma, anything that exceeds our capacity to cope. Soul work is a process of healthy disruption, as we've talked about, followed by an implementation of discipline of our mind, will, and emotions. So, how do we heal our soul wounds with soul work? Well, I'm so glad you've asked. We have to uncover the wound. Believe it or not, if we don't uncover the wound, it's not going to heal properly. And I'm going to tell you why. So in the healing process of a physical wound, for example, after the bleeding has stopped and inflammation has come and gone, it's necessary to expose the wound to air. Yes, we have to expose it. And that's going to be what closes the wound and allows new tissue to form. Now, avoidance only prolongs this healing process. And we've been talking about avoidance. Like I said, there's a lot of repetition happening on today's conversation and throughout this series, really. But avoidance is going to prolong that process of healing. Not only must we become aware that this wound exists, We must admit that we need help to change. We need help to heal that wound. And as I mentioned to you before, there's a system. We all have systems or support systems of people to help us along this journey, whether that be family or friends, that be colleagues or co-workers, that be our spiritual leaders, counselors, therapists, social workers, people in our lives who are ready and willing to be a support system to us. So, number 2, when we're talking about healing soul wounds with soul work, we have to establish wound boundaries. And I have shared this before, the power of boundaries and how they're really the parameters of who we are and who we are not. It's where I end and another person begins. These are personal property lines that influence how we experience the world around us. And within these boundaries, or as I've mentioned before in other episodes, this internal locus of control consists our feelings, our attitudes and beliefs, our behaviors, choices, values, limits, talents, thoughts, desires, and love. And so we have to make sure that we're establishing wound boundaries so that when we have exposure, because that first part is uncovering the wound, those boundaries will keep debris and anything that's not supposed to be around that wound, keep it at bay. So those boundaries will keep anything that's not supposed to be around when you're healing at bay. Number 3, develop resilience with grace. And so, as we know, life has its lemons, but with the right amount of sugar and the right amount of water, we can make some good old lemonade, okay? And healing our soul wounds is not a one-time thing, because suffering, as unfortunate as it may be, it is continuous and it's commonplace. We all in our humanity experience a level of suffering, and we as believers experience suffering because of our connection to Christ. However, there is a way of managing and coping with this suffering. And so here are what I like to call 5 graceful ways to bounce back when adversity rears its ugly head. And so I'm going to list all of these and then I'll explain them to you. So your support system, as we talked about before, having focus on our intentions, having a growth mindset, thinking optimistically, and being self-full. So when I talk about a support system, I'm being redundant, as I've mentioned it earlier in this episode. That includes our friends, our families, our co-workers and colleagues, our communities, our therapists and social workers and counselors, our spiritual leaders. Getting community surrounded about you to give you that graceful momentum, drive to push past the suffering. Not so much that we don't accept the reality of suffering, but that it helps us to continue to walk through and have perseverance when that suffering comes up in our lives. Again, being focused on intention and ignoring distraction. With that, it goes back to what I've talked about before. Again, redundancy, repetition, to help us get this thing rooted is responding over reacting, not allowing our emotions to get in the way of us being thoughtful and considerate of how we're navigating life in the times of suffering. And number 3 in this graceful 5 is a growth mindset. And there are 5 aspects of a growth mindset that I won't be able to go into great detail. Otherwise, we'll be on this video for a very long time. But learning, continuing to learn, continuing to plan and have a level of foresight, making progress, looking at our efforts, and then getting some feedback for constructive criticism. Number 4 in this graceful 5 is gratitude. We have to remember to be grateful for what God has done, what he's doing, and what he will do. His word demonstrates his faithfulness over time. And we have people in Hebrews talking about the Hall of Fame of faith, telling us about their experiences with the one and only God and his faithfulness. And then, of course, we have being self-full. And there's a difference. It's not selfish, but it's us being able to take care of ourselves. And in taking care of ourselves, we have an overflow that we're able to extend to others, our family, our friends, our children, our peers, our community. And so we want to be self-full. So these graceful 5 will be helpful as we think about healing our soul wounds with soul work. So I hope that this was helpful to you, that this was a blessing to you. Again, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this with someone you know. And don't forget to download our complimentary resource at www.gobraveloc.com. Again, that's www.gobraveloc.com. And until next time, remember to let your soul work be your best work to better you. Later.